I truly am delighted to be here again, to be back in Leuven. Although my Dutch teacher insists it's Leuven. Don't push the N's and always pronounce the V's as F's. So I come here and say Leuven, and you all say Leuven. Okay. So let's begin with the most important lesson of the 21st century. The lesson that we're now dependent on you to get the 21st century right. To save the planet. I know it's a large task, but someone has to do it. And the people I'm looking at right now are as qualified as anyone to do it. How could that be? You see, for far too long, my generation has made a mess of things. We got it wrong in the latter part of the 20th century and most of the first decade of the 21st on a great deal of fronts. We've left our economies teetering, our security under constant threat, our environment choking, and our relations with others who are different from us far too tense and far too distrustful. We've rendered our political systems nearly dysfunctional to the point where they're clearly part of the problem instead of being the source of the solution. You see, the parallels between Belgium and the United States this year have been extraordinary. Never before have two countries done so relatively well in such difficult times, simply to impose extraordinary challenges on themselves through political chaos. And yet, such political chaos in both countries is in large part a luxury that they've chosen to endure, at least in part, because they can afford to do so. And such political chaos is at its heart caused by the inefficiency of democracy. Whether the inefficiency of trying to put together a coalition from those with divided thoughts, or the inefficiency of trying to govern with a Senate and a House of Representatives controlled by opposing political parties. Yet it is this very inefficiency of democracy that I would submit is ultimately, and should ultimately always be, a source not of embarrassment for either the United States or Belgium, but a source of pride. Indeed, many throughout North America this year risked their lives or paid with their lives in the hope of one day attaining the inefficiency of democracy that Belgium and the United States so publicly have flouted these last 2 years. Now, clearly both countries, Belgium and the United States, can and should do better. Leaders in both countries and every one of us in public life need to do better to avoid partisanship and stalemate. And citizens should demand that we do. Leaders can and should look to the greater good rather than to the political good that will make them look greater. But just as clearly, for all the pessimism that's reigned in both countries this year, for all the jokes and discussions of Guinness Books of Records, for all the attention given to rating agencies as if they were some divine determiner of prosperity, Belgium and the United States today remain two democracy glasses half full, not half empty. Despite being here for more than 2 years, despite well understanding the controversy between the North and the South, the issues of economics, of language, and of history, the political hurdles that have been erected to greater prosperity in Belgium are even somewhat more mystifying and more difficult to understand and accept than they are for me in the US. You see, to me as an outsider looking in, as a veteran of the US political world, Belgium, in fact, is one of the most politically unified countries on the planet. Now that has to sound so outstanding that I better repeat it just so you can be sure that I did not in fact misspeak. To me, Belgium is one of the most politically unified countries on the planet. You see, most countries have significant substantive policy disagreements among their political parties. In other countries, parties disagree over climate, over the very belief in the science of climate, over the need to cut the carbon footprint. In other countries, parties disagree over health care, whether all citizens should be covered or whether we should tolerate 40 million uninsured. Parties disagree over foreign policy and over the importance of the transatlantic relationship and of trade. Parties disagree over abortion and a woman's rights to choose, over debt ceilings. The gap, for example, in the United States between the Tea Party on the right and the Liberal Democrats on the left is indeed quite large. It's an immense gap between our Tea Party and our Liberal Democrats. But no such fundamental disagreements exist between any Belgian parties. If the political gap in the US were a football goal, the gap in Belgium would span only the left goalpost. Like the US, Belgium too has the luxury to some extent of tolerating more controversy and more economic doubt as a product of the inefficiency of democracy. You see, when all agree on health care, on climate, on the importance of the transatlantic relationship, and on so much more of the fundamental issues, then even the difference between building a bridge or a tunnel can divide an informed and active political electorate. So with my president and the country in which I represent him agreeing on every substantive issue, I work daily urging Belgium to help lead in the formation of a European consensus. I therefore see Belgium as a critical link in bringing the US and Europe together on our joint pursuit of our joint goals, in helping to build a consensus on climate, on Afghanistan, on economic recovery, on the Middle East. You see, Belgium is in the ideal position to lead in forming that consensus. Now, of course, I know that there are other bigger countries. I know that there are richer countries. But to me, Belgium leads in credibility. Belgium does not talk often, and it never shouts. When Belgium does talk, it does so for only one reason. It has something to say. So when Belgium talks, others do take note. Germany, for example, can differ with France, or Europe North with Europe South, but Belgium often speaks to and for all. Belgium's credibility can lead to a European consensus, and when you're America looking at your allies, the consensus builder remains potentially your most important partner. How do you think Herman Van Rompuy has remained endorsed by all of Europe in a period of its greatest turmoil? And Belgium has led in the past. Belgium was one of the leaders in Europe expressing the opposition to the war in Iraq. Indeed, a Belgian foreign minister and a Belgian defense minister, who's now a good friend, a former defense minister, once argued fervently to ban US military from shipping any items through the port of Antwerp, or even being allowed to cross over Belgian airspace. Now, if Belgium could lead in Europe in expressing the opposition to the United States when our policies so disagreed with one another, Belgium can and should again lead in Europe when Belgium's, Europe's, and the United States' policy dovetail as closely as they do today. See, the challenges that we faced will continue to unite us more than any disagreements than we have could possibly divide us. We will build that 21st century together, and I look forward to building it with each of you. Thanks so much, and all the best.